Everybody, I'm sorry for the delay. Our host for today literally had her network just go down 5 minutes before we were supposed to start. My name is Mary Reeder. I'm a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee, and you are probably seeing my screen right now on the screen because our network is having a little bit of an issue here today. I'm going to attempt to do an intro, though, on the fly, and we can get started. Our speakers today are Sheryl Gesoff. She's the director of the Health Sciences Library at Elmhurst Hospital Center in Elmhurst, New York. She's most interested in responding to the needs of hospital employees in innovative ways, including purchasing web-based tutorials such as Rosetta Stone and differential diagnoses programs, such as Isabel Healthcare. Sheryl's favorite podcasts include Scientific American's 60-Second Science, Freakonomics, NPR's Fresh Air, StoryCorps, The Moth, and Pop Culture Happy Hour. Our second speaker is Christine Beardsley. She's the Interlibrary Loan Librarian at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City, where she also serves as the library blog editor. She completed her MLIS in 2009 and has a background in anthropology. Christine is interested in the changing world of information and what libraries can do to aid in the future of technology and communication. A few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. This webinar does not have interactive chat capabilities. If you wish to comment on today's presentation using Twitter, you may use the hashtag ALCTSCE for ALCTS Continuing Education. We will not be monitoring the Twitter feed, however. If you have questions for our speakers, please type them in the question box on your screen, and they will answer them as time permits throughout their presentation. Questions which remain unanswered while we're on the air will be answered offline and answers sent to all attendees. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive an email with links to the recording, the presentation slides, and an evaluation within a few days. Please do take the time to send the evaluation form in, since it's used by the Continuing Education Committee to plan future events. There may be a slight delay as I turn the presentation over to Sheryl.
Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So today we're going to present what are podcasts and what role can librarians play. I'm Sheryl Gesoff.
And I'm Christine Beardsley.
We're gonna start out with a poll. Do you listen to podcasts? So I'm just gonna set up this poll. Watch.
And you can go ahead and
Oh wait, close. Whoops. I'm really sorry. I closed that early.
Let's reopen that for a second if we can. We'll see how that goes. Okay, well, it looks like we may have closed that a bit too early, but we'll just keep going. It looks like those of you who did get a chance to vote, most of you are podcast listeners. And for those of you who didn't, sorry about that. Hopefully on the next one we'll
Okay, so this class will answer these questions. What are podcasts? Why should you care? And what can you do about them? The first question is, what are podcasts?
So a more formal definition that we come up with is free audio or video shows distributed through RSS. Shows are pushed to subscribers as they're published, like DVR, magazines, or Google Reader. Once they're downloaded, they can be played regardless of internet connection.
And we're going to break that definition down.
So, free audio or video shows distributed through RSS. Here it is downloading automatically on the left side, and on the right side you hit play to hear it. Easy. These shows are like listening to old-time radio. Podcasts are like listening to NPR on your own schedule. fact, lots of NPR shows are uploaded to podcasts.
So there's Fresh Air with Terry Gross, which is interview shows of different people. All Songs Considered, which is about music. Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, which is a quiz show about current affairs. And Pop Culture Happy Hour, which is a panel discussion on different aspects of pop culture. And all other shows on NPR are uploaded to podcasts.
There's also podcasts from TV, and here are a few examples. Podcasts also have a lot of unique content that you don't find other places. There are educational shows, and remember, these shows are approachable. Some are short and meant for the general public or students. Some are meant for scholars and professionals like doctors and lawyers. You know your patrons, and you know what shows might interest them. They're put out there by a wide variety of people, professionals, lay people, publishers, and other media companies. And we'll talk more about educational podcasts as we go.
And these are unique content. You can't get these shows from anywhere else.
So there's some popular educational shows as well, things that are entertaining and intellectually stimulating, but not really, they explain concepts really well, I think. So Freakonomics, sort of a soft economics show, 60-Second Science from Scientific American, Radiolab from NPR, and 99% Invisible, which is about design. These are all examples of that type of show. And there are also fun shows with not-so-famous people who sometimes are sort of celebrities, mini-celebrities, podcasting celebrities, sports shows like Bill Simmons, movie reviews, Rotten Tomatoes has one, Adam Carolla has a comedy show, there's gardening podcasts and grammar podcasts, and just lots of entertaining content.
There's also interviews with famous people, and these shows are like, they're often like listening into therapy sessions. I was listening to a show one time, and somebody said, you know, nobody knows this, but I tried to commit suicide, and I was in a psych ward for 2 years. And there's something about the intimacy of audio that gets people to confess. There's also interviews of people that are interesting, but just people that you would never hear ordinarily. So the creator of Mad Men was on a podcast, and then Bob Gaudio, who wrote the Four Seasons songs.
And actually, before we open that poll, I just wanted to mention something else about, or while you're answering, maybe, about podcasts, which is just it's a really intimate medium because you're hearing from people in their own voices. So the poll is now open, and the question for those of you who are podcast listeners, how, sorry, I got confused there. What podcasts do you listen to? How often do you listen to podcasts? It looks like we...
That's okay. The poll is how often do you listen to podcasts, and that should be on your screen. So it looks like 43% of you listen daily, and down to 29% of people is never. So you're hearing about podcasts for the first time, or maybe you're a little bit familiar.
Okay. We're going to close that.
Oh, and then we'll share it.
Okay. And now we've shared the poll results. Hopefully you can see them. And we're going to move on to the second part of the definition. Shows are pushed to subscribers as they're published, like magazines, Google, or DVR. As you'll see on the next slide, subscribing is kind of complicated at first, like using databases or other things with a learning curve is, and we're going to give you this handout. It's just not that simple at first. There's a learning curve, and some people take to it more easily than others.
Also, it's not even easy where the apps are to download these things. It's finding them out, especially on Android actually. Most people who listen to podcasts have an Apple or an iPhone actually, according to a study. But it's available. You just have to know where it is. So podcasts, to subscribe to podcasts is difficult. But after you subscribe, and you only have to subscribe one time, after you subscribe, it's relatively easy. On the left-hand side is the shows downloading automatically, and that happens behind the scenes. And then on the right-hand side is a screenshot of how to play them. So you hit that little triangle, you have your headphones on, and it just plays automatically. So we're going to go through our personal favorite topics to listen to. Mine is true storytelling, and again, you won't find these podcasts anywhere else, and you won't ordinarily hear these people even on the computer, on the internet. So this is an example of one of these very emotional podcasts, actually. It's basically about a kid who became quadriplegic and an older man who helped him go to college. And it was 3 to 5 minutes, and I can tell you I cried.
Was that from StoryCorps?
That was from StoryCorps.
Okay. And my favorites are sort of nerdy, but in the celebratory sense, nonfiction podcasts. One I listened to last week that I really liked was this episode of New Tech City, where the host interviewed some technology people about their rules for their kids' use of tablets and other devices, their restrictions on their own children on screen time, and little experiments they had done to see what happened. Is there a difference between educational screen time and entertaining screen time? And she also talked to a journalist who had spoken to Steve Jobs about his kids and how they liked the iPad, and found out that he didn't let them use it. So it was really interesting. I enjoyed it a lot. It's something that we all, have to deal with, but hearing from these people talk about their experience, it really adds something.
Now we're going to go on to, the third part of the definition. Once podcasts are downloaded, they can be played regardless of internet connection. And that's why you could listen to it on the subway. We live in New York, so it's the subway for us. And the highway, and while you're shopping, anywhere. And most people listen to them when their hands and eyes are otherwise occupied. So you have jogging and driving, waiting in a waiting room, laundry, cooking, wherever you are where you could listen but you can't watch. And I often actually choose to listen to podcasts rather than watch TV sometimes. Okay. And this is handy because it fills in cracks in your day. Podcasts are available at different lengths. So there's 1-minute podcasts, 5-minute podcasts, 10-minute podcasts, 60-minute podcasts. So whatever you're doing, you can definitely just hit play and listen to even a minute and learn something or be entertained. And what do podcasts cost? They're free.
They're mostly free. This is Christine. I have seen some that were for continuing medical education that did have costs associated with them, but the vast majority of them are free and are out there for anybody to listen to.
Okay, so to summarize the question, what are podcasts? Podcasts are free audio shows. You can listen to them whenever and wherever you want, and there's unique content on them. There's unoriginal content too, like 60 Minutes and shows you're familiar with. But I think one of the important things about podcasts is that they're unique. Again, you can't get it from anywhere else.
And there are a lot of podcasts for niche markets and for people with very particular interests. So yeah, you're going to hear things that maybe aren't going to get their own cable show or, you know, mentioned on some huge national network because somebody's able to produce their own content and put it up there.
Podcasts are user-friendly. So as we've seen, they're not user-friendly to set up, and that's why the question mark comes in there. Not user-friendly to set up, but once you do set them up, once you choose your shows, you just have to get over that hurdle of doing it once, and then you just hit play and listen to it. And spoiler alert, this question is one of the reasons why you should care about podcasts, because as librarians, we're intermediaries between our patrons and information and entertainment. And we can, as you'll see later, we can act as intermediaries in podcasts, just as we do for databases.
And just facilitate them using them. That's another rule.
Excuse me. So our podcast user-friendly. We've gone over, yes, once they're set up, you just hit play. Are they user-friendly to set up? No, definitely not, as we've seen with the directions.
And is it user-friendly to choose shows? The best way to find shows, it really depends. It's not really user-friendly to find them. People say word on the street is that you can get everything from Google. You can Google search certainly any topic and the word podcast, and things will come up. But a lot of people don't know how to Google search for them. They might just use their iTunes search or whichever app they're using, that search, which could limit what is available to them.
And also, even if you search the topic, so say stories and podcasts, there's usually not a direct link to listen to it, and definitely not with, if you have iTunes app, it doesn't open up, so you see a list of shows for gardening, say, and then you can't just click the podcast show and have it open up in an iTunes app. As we've seen, there's a lot of hurdles to get on to download shows.
Yeah, so Googling will find you some lists of podcasts, but you're not going to just click on a link from Google and be able to download the podcast. You may be able to stream it, but it's limited in how useful it is. Word of mouth, talking to your friends, is a great way to hear about podcasts. And, of course, that is dependent on you having people that you talk about podcasts with, other friends who are listeners. Or if you listen to a podcast, oftentimes they will promote other podcasts, either say it's made by friends of the podcast hosts, whatever it is. They often mention other podcasts that they think you might like and that you should check out. So that's another good way.
Also, just housekeeping. At the bottom of slides, you'll see the source of images, and it's just that, like a citation for the image.
So, searching podcasts within an app, these searches are really clunky. I'm sure some of you have noticed. This is an example of a search for top podcasts in science, or this may be the list. It's a search for the
yeah,
top
so
podcasts.
This is a screenshot of my phone, and we searched science. So we searched the word science, and this is what came up.
Okay, and so what you see here, on the one side, we have some very outdated content here on the left, coming up before things that were updated last Tuesday. And then on the right, it's the same thing. It's even more out of date in this case. And it's sort of unclear why these are organized this way. There may not be controlled vocabulary or formal indexing, and it's certainly hard for you to be able to filter or sort or anything like that. This is not the kind of search that we would want for ourselves or our users. Most apps also have categories. For example, the iTunes app has top 100 podcast lists in a few categories, but they are very broad, and so here you see the top 100 podcasts in arts, but it's including things like food and cooking and book reviews. It's just a huge category, so the utility is pretty limited.
And as you can see, they're also outdated. So number 18 is a podcast that hasn't been updated since 2008. So podcasts are often like blogs. People start them and then they just abandon them. And in this case, you know, like a fifth of 100 is showing something that was abandoned in 2008.
And Mashable agrees. Here is a headline from the end of 2013. Discovery problem. Why is it so hard to find new podcasts? If you follow the link, which is also listed in the citations at the end of the presentation, there is the article about how newer, lesser-known podcasts can be tough to find, about how no one outside of Apple really knows how their lists work, what the ranking is about, and also a list of other sites and apps that are hoping to address the problem. Yeah, it's a big opportunity, basically.
And we'll go over that and why you should care.
So finding shows not too user-friendly.
So another question, the second question is, why should you care about podcasts? You've probably gotten a few ideas from the presentation already, and so we can help this burgeoning and unique medium. And podcasts are part of librarianship, according to librarians.
So librarians are involved in social media and podcasting themselves, and they're also using, they're researching the use of social media in podcasts, or social media that includes podcasts. Now, this next slide, at MLA this past spring, Sally Gore, who is an embedded librarian and informationist at the medical school there, presented a poster that was taking an idea called the Becker Medical Library Model for Assessment of Research Impact, and applying it to the work of a librarian, individual librarian rather than an individual researcher. And basically, I'm no expert on the Becker model, but the idea is to help your users and community plan to increase the impact of their research and to document that by keeping track of all of these little things that aren't part of traditional metrics, like social media, followers, downloads of your SlideShare, downloads of your figures, all of these things that are part of the sort of larger information environment, but that aren't traditionally tracked. They're not part of regular citation metrics. And podcasts weren't actually a word on the poster, but they were listed on her handy handout that she gave you when you visited her poster. It was one of the things on the back in the list of things that you should consider tracking to get this broader picture of your impact as a librarian. I thought it was really interesting. So they're there as part of this larger picture of what's going on.
And also, when you think about it, first of all, social media is part of something scholarly. The American Library Association has Twitter, for instance, and has conversations on Twitter. and other professions have the same thing. And also podcasts can be seen as social media specifically because we'll see this a little bit more later, but somebody creates this podcast and talks, and then other people talk to them in social media or in person, and they can get they can have this back and forth.
Yeah, there's a dialogue that happens, and yeah, we'll discuss this more further along. But yeah, it is something that we should all consider being aware of and trying to keep tabs on and trying to support our colleagues and our users in doing and in tracking.
And for all you American Library Association librarians, MLA stands for Medical Library Association.
Yeah, sorry about that. And also Modern Language Association, but that's not the one we're talking about. Sorry.
And when you're looking at the slide, it's just it's on there also. So what I find particularly interesting about podcasts, it's this untouched medium, and you can consider it a medium because it's unique. It's a unique way to get information. It's a unique content as well as other content, and it's sort of untouched. So we can really help as librarians. We could really help to put our stamp on this new medium, and the word on the street is you can get everything from Google, but as you've seen, you can't get to this information from Google. Podcasts are should also care about podcasts because they're part of scholarly communication, and we discussed part of this before. I conducted an interview with Dr. Scott Weingart, host of MCRIT. Dr. Weingart is an emergency head of emergency medicine at Elmhurst Hospital Center. And MCRIT is the #1 medical podcast in the world, and he's something that happens to be a field that is very interested in social media. For instance, his MCRIT has been around for 3 years. And he said and in this interview, he said there's a role for a shepherd through the morass of new media. There's no one piecing out what the best information is. And in the interview, he says, you know, we're going to be left behind if we don't start searching for social media because so much information is out there. And he goes through, in the interview, he goes through 3 ways that scholarly communication and podcasts in particular are important in scholarly communication. So there's tacit knowledge.
That was really interesting. It, as this next slide shows, it's an opportunity for things to be explained in a way that doesn't really work in a published article.
So he said podcasts transmit all the little tips and tricks and learning to take something from public research to implementation. And he can pass on tips from his experience, his know-how that he's gained from being a physician. And in the interview, he discussed, he explained how traditional journals have tried to pass on this information, but they can't. There's a significant lag time between when it's published and when it goes into practice. And as librarians, we know this, right? It takes a very long time to go from published to when people know about it.
It also takes a very long time if somebody sees your article and then, you know, they write a letter in responding to your article. Well, what is that, like another year at least before that's published? And then if either of those are cited, we all know that's even more time. So the traditional way of doing this is very, very, very slow, and this is well, for Dr. Weingart, it's a better way. So it's something we should all keep an eye on.
Yeah, actually, I was talking to a nurse in my hospital, and she said it was 3 years. 3 years from the time she decided to publish to the time that she could hand us a copy of the article. So this is just an example. You don't have to understand what this means, but it's an example of, it's a quote from one of MCRIT's episodes. And it says, ask your nurses to give you a syringe full of something, and he just takes it right from the fentanyl drip. And this means by saying I, this is tacit knowledge. This is knowledge that he's gained on the floors, and he can just talk about it, and other people can listen to it and put it into practice. He also said podcasts are part of his academic work product. So when he is up for a promotion or showing his work to people, he can cite his podcast. And he said podcasts are superior to journal articles in some way because he has the numbers of listeners and the email saying how he changed physicians' behavior. So he can just say that, and he has that information. He's printed out those emails and show it to people. So podcasts are part of scholarly conversation on social media. They're like conferences, like the Medical Library Association conference or the American Library Association conferences. But he said when you go to conferences, maybe there's some time for a few questions and answers, but there's no dialogue. The person gets up there and talks, and maybe there's time for a few questions, a few answers, but that's it. There's no back and forth. And then he says when he publishes, and he says traditional journals have their place, but when he publishes his work, it's already been acid tested by his peers. It's already been through the mill of this conversation. And you should also care about podcasts because some of your community uses them, and this number is rising. Like all librarians, we spread the knowledge in books, right? Because people read books, and they have information or entertainment in them, and that's one of the reasons why we talk about it.
And yeah, so here is some data that we have adapted from information from the Pew Internet and American Life project. And as you can see, the number of people who report themselves, people in the U.S. Who are adults and use the Internet, and it's going up, the number who say that they listen to podcasts significantly in the last 3 years especially. And some librarians had similar findings. This is from an academic library. They basically found similar results. They surveyed students at Sam Houston State, and you can find the citation for this in our list at the end, in 2010 and then again in 2013 to find out about their social media involvement. And they found that not only were more students or who responded in this particular case listening, and there were problems with this survey. As with all surveys, there was some bias in who answered. Over 70% of the people who answered were female, so this may not reflect all universities or even all of their universities' percent of podcast listeners, but there's a definite trend that they recorded. And they also found that of those who listened, they listened, well, they're dedicated listeners, and we'll get to that later. So users, according to Pew, still tilt towards early adopters, and that's a shame because podcasts are free and entertaining and educational, and with more and more people using smartphones, you'd think, it would be spreading further. And there's definitely some possibility of a role for librarians there. This is also from the Sam Houston State. So they did the 2013 survey to follow up the 2010 survey because the iPad had been released and they wanted a new, an update, which I really appreciate. Thanks, guys. And as you can see here, this is the difference between occasional and weekly users. So the number of occasional people went down in 2013, but the weekly people went up. So they interpreted that as being a more dedicated group of regular listeners. But they also found that most of the people who responded to them were only interested in listening to podcasts related to their educational topics and not podcasts about the library.
And you should also be interested in podcasts because some of your community does not use podcasts. These are, as we've gone over, this is entertaining and scholarly information, so we should help them out. So barriers to adoption, why don't people listen to these podcasts? And we've gone over this a little bit before. There's this technology barriers to subscribing to podcasts. There's also a question of what are podcasts and why should I listen to them?
And do I need an iPod? I mean,
right.
Yeah.
People just don't know. And there's also a certain loneliness in listening to podcasts. With other mediums like TV, you can talk about it, did you see Mad Men last night? But it's really hard to say to somebody, even This American Life is fairly popular. It's really hard to say, oh, did you listen to This American Life? It was so interesting. It's really hard to have a discussion.
We imagine that there are two groups of these sort of non-listeners, people who would listen if they got some support and people who wouldn't listen anyway. So, keep that in mind that may be the case if you're trying to do outreach. And we're also, likewise, this came up just Sheryl and I talking about occasional users. Some people would listen more if they had support. Other people, they're doing what they're interested in, and we maybe can't convert them. But there are some folks who we may be able to get more involved.
Okay, so we're going to do another poll. We already did this poll. We're not going to do that until we've finished the presentation because it's basically a measure of how this presentation changed you. Okay, so the final question is, what can I do? We've given you a lot of information about podcasts, and the third question is basically an action statement.
Okay, so you can work on knocking down barriers to podcasts. Like we do with podcasts, like we do with databases and other complicated resources. We learn them, we teach them, we promote them, so why not with podcasts? And similar to any other medium, in order to promote them and know them and share them, we have to be users. So listen to podcasts on your own, just like you do books. It sounds like a lot of you already do. And then you can talk about them with your users. And listening to your users also, and finding out not just what you think they need, but what they say they need, what they say they do, and responding to that, participating with what's going on already in your community. That's really important. And I took a class this summer online, and a lot of what he talked about involved your community and keeping up with your community and responding to them. Also, teach. So how do you set it up? How do you listen? All of those things that we've touched on, and we'll have some more ideas coming up. and promoting, just like any other medium, books, journals, videos. There are some public libraries that do a great job of promoting their own programs, Seattle Public, NYPL, Los Angeles Public Library, recording their author talks and their lectures and events and putting them out on podcasts, on YouTube, all these things. It allows other people who can't attend to hear them, and it also is like, hey, look at our awesome library and these great things we're doing. And of course, you can promote them with posters, newsletters, in your emails, in personal conversations, in your library and personal social media accounts, all of the places where you would normally do promotion.
And this is a screenshot of one of the library iPads. We're medical librarians. We're medical librarians, and so people are interested in medical topics. And so in a lot of apps, you can make playlists and shows. So we have anesthesiology and cardiology, dermatology, and the shows go through, like any other playlist, the shows go through those categories. And so when I want to show a cardiologist podcast, I can click on the cardiology podcast and show all the shows on the right, and just click it and play it. Yeah.
So Sheryl's community is very diverse. So she promotes certain things like language podcasts. There's also promote certain topics. What do your people want?
And as librarians, you know what your people want. Just like I know that they're interested in medicine and languages, you know what your people are interested in.
Right. And you can promote certain shows. For example, maybe people would be interested in Radiolab or Scientific American. You can then promote certain episodes. Maybe there's an interview with somebody who, is like Hillary Clinton or the creator of Mad Men. Maybe you can write a blog post about one of those, or share it otherwise, or just talk it up and let people know about it.
And also, you can create community. So like what I was talking about before, you can create the same thing that
we do with books.
That we do with books, that people have naturally with TV. Did you see Mad Men? We could create a discussion group, a listening group about, did you hear that interview with Hillary Clinton and how interesting it was, and let's talk about what she had to say. It's actually a very interesting episode.
And yeah, you could also try to do that in a digital format as well, not just on a in-person thing.
Right, so like what we're doing now.
Right, exactly. Also, you can share podcasts. There is an app called SoundCloud. It's not perfect, but NPR, they put all their podcasts on SoundCloud. Not all of them, most of them. Sharing has its problems, but they give you a link, and you can embed it, you can email it, you can stick it on your blog, and people can stream it right from there. It's really helpful for that. But yeah, it's clunky. You can't search anything and put spaces in between words where they're not there. It's not smart enough to figure that out for you. So certain things that we've been trained to kind of not worry too much about don't work in SoundCloud.
And Dig agrees with this. So they posted an article called "Why Audio Never Goes." Why Audio Never Goes Viral, and they listed a number of reasons why. But one of them was it's really, really difficult to share, or impossible. If you're in an app and it's not on SoundCloud, it's really impossible to share it. You can also, as librarians, we can also help to organize podcasts. And one idea I had was to use the Library of Congress subject headings. This is interesting because it shows how diverse and specific shows are. So they have a podcast, a whole podcast with multiple episodes about etiquette and how to be mannerly. And they're almost as diverse as books, all these different shows. There's a show specifically on capitalism.
Okay, and you could keep track of them on a spreadsheet. You could add them to appropriate subject or LibGuides that you already have. Put a couple podcasts on there and see if people start clicking on them. If your library has LibGuides, you could create a LibGuide either of just different podcast suggestions or some of the authors that we've come across have suggested, and I've definitely seen these LibGuides, creating a LibGuide about how to use podcasts, how to set them up, not just recommendations. But if you do use LibGuides at your library, they have ways for you to embed the content right into your LibGuide. It's pretty handy. It's cool. I am building one now for my library. It is not done, though, or I would share it with you.
She'll share it with you when she's done.
When I'm done, I can send it to you guys. But, yeah, then you'll have the analytics if you keep track of that. If you are doing this online or on a web page, you can see what's getting clicked on. Are people even visiting the page? So you'll know.
So the future of podcasts is wide open, as we've discussed. Somehow podcasts began in 2004, but as you can see, the technology is in its infancy, and other mediums there's so much research about, but podcasts, we couldn't find that many articles.
So we did find some things. There was research done about social media and reading in the UK, and a really interesting commentary about that. So those citations are in the citations at the end, and check them out if you're interested in doing some research of that variety. There is a need to develop best practices. So how are we going to promote podcasts?
And these are some questions. We won't go through them all,
yeah.
But you could look at them on the slides. So there's different questions around promoting podcasts, different questions around organizing podcasts. An idea I had was to create a database for episodes. So the same thing, you can search for different things within medicine or different things within academia. Why couldn't you create a podcast, a database of episodes for podcasts where you can search for, John Hamm and pop out the audio of John Hamm's interview.
And why not be able to have there be a user recommendation component along with that? Why can't we build that?
And also teaching podcasts, there's a lot of questions surrounding that. And librarians can start a dialogue to answer these questions and other questions. Okay, so we're going to do the last question. Will you increase your participation in podcasts, either by listening to them or teaching them, organizing them,
promoting them? So we're getting some votes coming in. We're going to keep this open for another minute. And it looks like a little more than half of you have voted, so we'll do another minute or two. Okay, we may have some holdouts on the voting. Perhaps there are some groups out there. We're going to close it
and share it. So as you can see, 67% yes, 33% no, and 14% did not vote.
And
so in summary, so what are podcasts? They're free audio shows. You can listen whenever, wherever. They include unique content as well as an overlap with other mediums. And why you should care, they're scholarly and entertaining and informative. And what you should do, listen, teach, promote.
And yeah, we had a few sort of technology surprises today. So we're going to open up look at the questions real quickly and see what's happening. I don't know. something that needs to be.
Okay, so this is the end of the presentation. Are there any questions? Comments?
I'm not sure.
If anybody has questions, they can type them into the questions box.
We covered it so well, there are no questions.
Well, if you do come up with any thoughts or questions, or if you'd like to reach out to us about anything we talked about today, please send us your questions. Our emails are at the bottom, and our numbers, and you can reach out and get in touch with us that way.
Ladies, we did just get a question. It says, what kinds of library resources would you podcast about? Well, this podcast concentrates on, this class concentrates on consuming podcasts, getting people to listen. But definitely librarians are creating their own podcasts.
And they're also, I wanted to mention during the presentation, and I got going, we were a little off time, and I didn't. There are definitely librarians teaching their users how to podcast. So how to create their own podcasts.
And what are they?
The woman, Kimberly Barker, who I'm thinking of at University of Virginia's medical library, she is a technology librarian, and she's creating a podcast about technology. So her first episode was about 3D printing. Yeah, so you could do it about anything, really. I don't know that at my library my users would be interested in listening to podcasts about the library, but at some libraries they might be. It sounded like in the Sam Houston State survey they weren't really interested, but that may not be true.
And just to be clear, that's podcasts about database instruction and, you know,
library
collection
news.
Development, library news. They're not as interested in that.
Other librarians, I think, would be interested in your podcasts about being a librarian, definitely. I wasn't able to find any current ones when I was looking around preparing this, and I was pretty surprised by that. And it could just be that I was looking in the wrong place.
And that's the interesting thing about it. It's such an empty space. I always think of blogs as very crowded, that everybody has a blog, that everybody's sort of abandoned their blog. But this would be the only one. So if you create a podcast and send it out to librarians, there's not as much, I would think you would get at least some listeners.
Not as noisy, sorry,
yeah.
Sorry, a little corny there, but not as much going on in that area.
Okay. We have another question.
Okay.
Do you suggest creating a database outside of Apple or any other product?
Yeah, I think what I meant by that was, well, we know PubMed.
Right.
You guys know more academic and entertaining things. So on ours, it would be something like even Ebola. So you could enter in Ebola and find and search across podcasts so there would be news about Ebola and like the politics of Ebola maybe, but it would come up with episodes about that, and I don't know, in my mind you could click something and hit play.
I think that right now that would be a ways off for librarians to be able to do that, because just having the consistent indexing of podcasts, just, you know, imagine it like you know, such and such podcast, episode 1, and all the topics it covers and all the guests, episode 2, and doing that for every single podcast out there. Not to mention having things be, you know, having things disappear as they do. They're sort of ephemeral in a way. People abandon them. So, so yeah, that would be a ways off, but I think starting to promote them and create links to them and making them more visible that way is a great place to start.
Okay, the question that asked the person that asked the first question is also asking, how about interviews with scholars and about how they use the library?
I don't know. It's hard to tell what people would be interested in, but yeah, it's really like throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks.
I think that would be really cool. I'd like to listen to that podcast.
Right.
I mean,
definitely would get an audience among librarians. It would be really interesting.
And if your library serves a niche audience like academic libraries, promote it out to other academic libraries if you wanted to do something like that and see how it goes. Yeah, and write an article about it.
Yeah, write an article about it. You could share it with everyone.
She says good points. All right, any other questions from anyone? Okay, if not, I'm going to switch the screen back to me. All right, thank you, Sheryl and Christine, for your engaging presentation on why libraries should promote podcasts and how to start doing that. Thank you also to all of our attendees. We hope you found today's session useful. You'll soon be receiving a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return the forms to us. Your comments are very valuable and help the ALCTS committee plan new continuing education offerings. Information about all ALCTS webinars can be found on the ALCTS webpage that you're looking at. 6 more webinars are on the calendar for this year, and we have already started planning webinars for 2015. There are also a number of web courses you can sign up for, and you can sign up for our monthly e-forums. Suggestions for webinars and other continuing educational opportunities are welcome at any time. Please contact any member of the ALCTS committee or submit a proposal for a webinar using the online forms on the ALCTS webpage under Online Learning. I would like to thank Catherine Balick for providing technical support for today's webinar. The support she and her colleagues on the Technical Support Subcommittee provide make it possible for us to present these webinars smoothly. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we hope all of you participate in other ALCTS continuing education offerings again in the future. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks.